The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. In the depths of Renaissance Italy, Niccolo Machiavelli penned words that would echo through centuries. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. These words contain a profound truth about human nature and the dynamics of power that extends far beyond political maneuvering. They speak to a fundamental principle that governs not just kingdoms and courts, but the very fabric of personal transformation and psychological resilience. The concept of mystery as strength challenges everything modern society teaches about transparency and authenticity. We live in an age of oversharing, where vulnerability is marketed as courage and exposure is mistaken for honesty. Yet beneath this cultural noise lies an ancient wisdom. True power emerges not from revealing everything, but from carefully controlling what others perceive. This is not deception for its own sake, but rather the strategic cultivation of an inner sanctum that remains untouchable by external forces. Consider the individual who has learned to separate their public persona from their private evolution. They understand that the moment you reveal your full hand, you surrender the ability to maneuver effectively in a world that feeds on weakness and preys on predictability. The mystique they cultivate becomes a shield, protecting their most valuable asset, the ongoing process of self-creation that occurs beyond the reach of others' judgments and manipulations. This protection is not born of paranoia but of profound self-awareness. When someone truly understands their own psychology, they recognize that the most dangerous enemy they will ever face is not external opposition, but their own undisciplined impulses and unexamined patterns. The weak self, the version that seeks constant validation, that crumbles under pressure, that allows circumstances to dictate emotional states, must be systematically dismantled before any external strength can be genuinely claimed. The process begins with radical honesty about one's current state. Most people live in elaborate self-deceptions, crafting narratives that paint them as victims of circumstance rather than architects of their own limitations. They blame external forces for internal failures, seeking comfort in the illusion that their struggles are imposed from without rather than generated from within. This victim mentality, while temporarily soothing to the ego, becomes a prison that prevents genuine growth and development. Breaking free from this prison requires what ancient Stoics called the discipline of desire, the ability to want what actually serves you rather than what merely feels good in the moment. This discipline extends beyond simple impulse control to encompass a complete reorientation of how you relate to pleasure, pain, success, and failure. The weak self seeks immediate gratification and avoids all discomfort. The transformed self understands that temporary discomfort is often the price of lasting strength, while temporary pleasure frequently comes at the cost of long-term power. The cultivation of mystery serves this transformation in multiple ways. First, it creates space for genuine change to occur without the interference of others' expectations and projections. When people think they know who you are, they unconsciously pressure you to remain consistent with their image of you. This social pressure can be incredibly subtle yet powerfully limiting, creating invisible chains that bind you to outdated versions of yourself. Second, mystery generates a form of psychological leverage that transparent individuals never possess. When others cannot fully predict your responses or categorize your motivations, they must approach you with a degree of caution and respect. This is not about creating fear, but rather about maintaining the kind of dynamic tension that keeps interactions sharp and prevents you from being taken for granted. The businessman who never reveals his full financial position maintains negotiating power that complete transparency would destroy. The artist who keeps certain creative processes private preserves the magic that makes their work compelling. The individual who doesn't broadcast every personal struggle avoids becoming a target for those who would exploit perceived vulnerabilities. In each case, the mystery serves not as a mask to hide behind, but as armor that protects genuine strength while it develops. This protection is crucial because the process of destroying one's weak self is inherently vulnerable work. It requires periods of uncertainty, experimentation with new behaviors, and the temporary discomfort that comes with breaking old patterns. If this process occurs in full view of others, it becomes subject to their commentary, criticism, and well-meaning but ultimately limiting advice. The individual attempting transformation becomes like a butterfly trying to emerge from its cocoon, while surrounded by spectators offering suggestions about how the process should unfold. The weak self thrives on external validation and withers under external criticism. It seeks permission from others to change and apologizes for growth that makes others uncomfortable. The transformed self, by contrast, operates from an internal locus of control that remains steady regardless of external weather. This internal steadiness is not achieved through emotional numbness or detachment from others, but through the development of a core identity that is self-defining rather than other-dependent. Understanding Machiavellian psychology in this context means recognizing that human interactions are fundamentally games of perception and influence. This is not a cynical view of human nature, but a realistic one. Every social interaction involves elements of presentation, strategy, and positioning, whether conscious or unconscious. The choice is not whether to engage in these dynamics, they are unavoidable, but whether to engage skillfully or naively. The naive individual believes that good intentions and honest communication are sufficient for navigating complex human relationships. They approach interactions with an assumption of mutual goodwill and are repeatedly blindsided by the reality that not everyone shares their ethical frameworks or emotional maturity. Their transparency becomes a weapon in the hands of those who operate with less scrupulous methods. The psychologically sophisticated individual understands that trust and vulnerability must be earned and strategically deployed. They recognize that different relationships require different levels of openness, and that indiscriminate sharing is not authentic communication, but rather a form of emotional incontinence that burdens others and weakens one's own position. This sophistication extends to how one handles success and failure. The weak self broadcasts victories seeking validation and shares defeats seeking sympathy. Both responses diminish actual power by making one's emotional state dependent on others' reactions. The stronger approach involves maintaining equanimity in the face of both triumph and setback, sharing selectively and purposefully rather than compulsively. When others cannot easily read your emotional state or predict your responses to various circumstances, they cannot manipulate you as effectively. This is particularly important in professional environments where emotional volatility is often exploited by those seeking advantage. The individual who remains enigmatic about their true feelings while still being appropriately responsive to situations maintains a strategic edge that serves them throughout their career. The cultivation of this kind of controlled presentation requires extensive inner work. You cannot project calm confidence if you are internally chaotic. You cannot maintain mysterious allure if you are desperately seeking attention. The external presentation must be supported by genuine internal development, or it becomes mere performance that eventually cracks under pressure. This inner development begins with the systematic examination and elimination of self-defeating patterns. Most people carry unconscious programming from childhood, societal conditioning, and past traumas that automatically trigger specific responses to certain stimuli. These automatic responses represent the weak self in action, moments when past conditioning overrides present choice and conscious intention. The process of identifying these patterns requires the kind of honest self-observation that most people avoid, because it can be uncomfortable to see how predictable and reactive one's behavior actually is. Yet this discomfort is temporary, while the freedom that comes from breaking automatic patterns is permanent. Each pattern broken represents a victory over the weak self and a step toward genuine autonomy. Consider the individual who automatically becomes defensive when criticized. This defensiveness reveals the weak self's attachment to a particular image or identity. The criticism threatens this image, triggering an automatic protective response that actually confirms the criticism by demonstrating emotional immaturity. The transformed individual can hear criticism without automatic defensiveness, because their self-worth is not dependent on maintaining any particular image in others' minds. This detachment from image management paradoxically makes one more attractive and influential. People are drawn to those who seem comfortable in their own skin, who don't appear to need anything from the interaction. This comfort comes not from arrogance or indifference, but from the security of knowing that your core value is not determined by any single person's opinion or any particular outcome. The mystery component enhances this attractiveness by ensuring that others never feel they have completely figured you out. Humans are naturally curious about what they cannot fully understand or predict. This curiosity creates a form of mental engagement that transparent individuals rarely inspire. The person whose thoughts, feelings, and motivations are completely obvious may be trusted, but they are rarely compelling. Maintaining this compelling quality requires ongoing development and refinement of one's character and capabilities. Mystery without substance is merely pretense that will eventually be exposed. But mystery combined with genuine competence and depth creates a potent combination that serves both personal development and practical effectiveness in the world. The practical applications of these principles extend into every area of life. In relationships, the individual who maintains some degree of mystery avoids the trap of becoming completely predictable and therefore taken for granted. This doesn't mean being dishonest or emotionally unavailable, but rather maintaining interests, thoughts, and experiences that are not entirely shared with any one person. In professional settings, the ability to keep certain information private while remaining appropriately collaborative creates a reputation for discretion and strategic thinking that often leads to increased responsibilities and opportunities. The person who gossips about some colleagues will inevitably be suspected of gossiping about others, while the person who maintains appropriate boundaries around sensitive information is trusted with increasingly important matters. The financial realm provides another clear example of how selective disclosure serves practical purposes. The individual whose financial position is completely transparent to friends and family often finds themselves dealing with requests for loans, investment advice they're not qualified to give, and subtle resentment from those who are less successful. Maintaining privacy around financial matters protects relationships from these complications while preserving individual autonomy around financial decisions. These practical benefits are significant, but they pale in comparison to the psychological transformation that occurs when one successfully separates their internal reality from their external presentation. This separation is not about becoming false or manipulative, but about developing the capacity to choose how much of yourself to reveal in any given situation based on what serves your highest good and the good of others involved. The weak self has no such choice. It operates through automatic patterns of revelation and concealment based on fear, need, and conditioning rather than conscious strategy. It overshares when seeking connection and withdraws when feeling threatened, in both cases surrendering agency over how it is perceived and understood by others. This reactive approach to self-presentation guarantees ongoing vulnerability to manipulation and misunderstanding. The transformed individual operates from choice rather than compulsion. They share what serves the relationship or situation and withhold what doesn't, maintaining this boundary not from fear, but from wisdom. They understand that not every thought needs to be expressed, not every feeling needs to be shared, and not every aspect of their experience needs to be visible to others. This selective sharing requires developing what could be called emotional intelligence plus, not just the ability to recognize and manage emotions, but the strategic awareness to understand how emotional expression affects various relationships and outcomes. The person who cries at work after receiving difficult feedback may be authentically expressing their feelings, but they may also be inadvertently damaging their professional reputation in ways that serve no constructive purpose. Learning to manage these expressions doesn't mean becoming emotionally suppressed or inauthentic. Rather, it means developing the capacity to experience emotions fully while choosing consciously how to express them based on context and consequence. The transformed individual might feel the same hurt from difficult feedback, but they process it privately or with appropriate confidence rather than in front of colleagues who may interpret the emotional display as professional weakness. This kind of strategic emotional management is particularly important during periods of personal growth and change. The individual working to overcome addiction, heal from trauma, or develop new capabilities is inherently in a vulnerable state. Broadcasting this vulnerability widely often attracts advice, judgment, and interference that can complicate the healing process. Maintaining privacy around the work while it's in progress protects the delicate process of transformation from external complications. The metaphor of the butterfly's cocoon is relevant here. The transformation that occurs within the cocoon is invisible to outside observers and protected from their interference. The butterfly emerges only when the transformation is complete, revealing itself in its new form rather than exposing the messy process of metamorphosis. Human psychological transformation follows similar patterns. The most profound changes often occur in private and are revealed through changed behavior rather than detailed explanations of the process. This approach to personal development challenges the contemporary emphasis on being authentic, which often translates into broadcasting every internal struggle and sharing every step of one's journey. While this openness can be valuable in appropriate contexts with suitable confidants, it can also become a form of narcissistic display that serves ego needs rather than genuine growth. The more sophisticated approach involves doing the internal work privately while allowing others to witness the results through improved behavior and enhanced capabilities. This creates a much more powerful impression than constant reporting on the process itself. Others begin to notice that you handle stress better, respond to challenges more effectively, and seem more centered and capable than before. But they cannot quite identify what has changed or how the transformation occurred. This uncertainty about the source of your improvement adds to the mystique and makes the changes more impressive rather than less. When someone can trace your development to specific books you've read, therapy sessions you've attended, or programs you've completed, they can potentially replicate your path or dismiss your growth as merely the result of following someone else's system. When the transformation appears to emerge from your own inner resources, it suggests a depth of character and self-direction that cannot be easily categorized or replicated. The strategic value of this approach extends beyond personal impressions to practical effectiveness. The individual who has genuinely transformed themselves possesses capabilities that others cannot fully understand or predict. This unknown quantity factor provides significant advantages in negotiations, conflicts, and competitive situations. Opponents cannot prepare for what they cannot anticipate, and they cannot anticipate what they cannot understand. Military strategists have long understood the value of keeping capabilities and intentions unclear to potential adversaries. The same principle applies to personal interactions where conflicting interests are involved. The person whose full range of options and responses remains somewhat mysterious maintains a strategic advantage that complete transparency would eliminate. This advantage is not about being deceptive or harmful to others, but about maintaining the psychological space necessary for optimal decision-making and response. When others think they can predict your reactions, they may try to manipulate situations to trigger specific responses that serve their interests rather than yours. Maintaining some unpredictability protects against these manipulation attempts while preserving your freedom to respond authentically to situations as they actually unfold, rather than as others expect them to. The development of this kind of strategic awareness requires studying human psychology, not just in yourself but in others. Understanding common psychological patterns, cognitive biases, and emotional triggers allows you to navigate interactions more skillfully while avoiding the pitfalls that ensnare less psychologically sophisticated individuals. For example, recognizing that most people have a strong need to categorize and predict others allows you to frustrate this need strategically by presenting slightly contradictory information that prevents easy categorization. Someone who is simultaneously seen as confident and humble, serious and playful, ambitious and content becomes harder to put into a simple box, which creates a kind of psychological tension that keeps others engaged and attentive. This psychological tension is valuable because it prevents others from dismissing or ignoring you. The completely predictable person becomes background noise in others' consciousness, noticed only when needed for specific purposes. The person who maintains some degree of complexity and contradiction remains an active presence in others' awareness, which translates into increased influence and opportunity. The cultivation of productive contradiction requires careful balance. Too much contradiction appears inconsistent or unstable, while too little creates the predictability that eliminates mystique. The goal is to present genuine complexity in ways that intrigue rather than confuse, demonstrating depth rather than inconsistency. This balance is achieved through understanding that humans naturally contain contradictions and that acknowledging this complexity honestly is more compelling than trying to present a completely consistent image. A person who can be both decisive and thoughtful, both confident and curious, both independent and collaborative demonstrates the kind of psychological sophistication that others find attractive and trustworthy. These contradictions must be genuine rather than performed. Attempting to manufacture complexity for its own sake appears artificial and manipulative. The contradictions that create genuine mystique emerge from the full development of human potential rather than from strategic image management. The individual who has genuinely integrated opposing qualities like strength and gentleness, ambition and contentment, or confidence and humility naturally presents the kind of complexity that others find compelling. This integration of opposites is itself part of the process of destroying the weak self. The weak self operates from binary thinking. Things are either good or bad, people are either friends or enemies, situations are either favorable or unfavorable. This simplistic thinking creates rigidity that makes adaptation and growth difficult. The transformed individual develops the capacity to hold paradox and ambiguity comfortably, which provides much greater flexibility in response to life's complexities. The ability to remain comfortable with uncertainty extends to uncertainty about oneself. The weak self desperately wants to know who it is and have that identity confirmed by others. It seeks labels, roles, and categories that provide a sense of fixed identity. The transformed self understands that identity is fluid and contextual, that who you are depends partly on who you choose to be in each moment. rather than being determined by past patterns or external designations. This fluid sense of identity is initially uncomfortable for those accustomed to seeking security through fixed self-concepts, but it ultimately provides much greater freedom and power. When you are not locked into specific identity categories, you can respond to situations with much greater range and creativity. You become capable of surprising yourself as well as others, which keeps life interesting and growth ongoing. The mystery that emerges from this fluid identity is not calculated or strategic but natural and authentic. Others cannot fully predict your responses because you yourself are still discovering your full range of capabilities and expressions. This ongoing self-discovery creates a natural freshness and vitality that draws others while maintaining the kind of dynamic quality that prevents relationships and situations from becoming stagnant. Maintaining this dynamic quality requires ongoing commitment to growth and development that extends beyond mere self-improvement into genuine self-transformation. Self-improvement assumes that the current self is basically adequate and just needs enhancement in specific areas. Self-transformation recognizes that fundamental change may be necessary, and that the person you become may be quite different from the person you have been. This willingness to undergo fundamental change is what separates those who develop genuine mystery and power from those who merely adopt strategic behaviors. Surface-level changes in behavior may create temporary advantages, but they don't address the underlying psychological structures that generate weakness and predictability. True transformation requires examining and often dismantling deeply held beliefs, assumptions, and patterns that may have been central to previous identity. The process is analogous to renovating a house. Minor improvements like new paint and furniture can improve appearance and function without changing the basic structure. But sometimes the foundation is flawed, or the entire layout is problematic, requiring demolition and rebuilding rather than mere decoration. Psychological transformation often requires similar willingness to tear down and rebuild fundamental aspects of how you think, feel, and relate to the world. This rebuilding process is where the cultivation of mystery becomes most important. While undergoing fundamental changes, you are inherently vulnerable and uncertain. Broadcasting this vulnerability provides opportunities for others to interfere with the process through advice, criticism, or attempts to pull you back into familiar patterns that serve their comfort rather than your growth. The individual who announces their intention to change often finds themselves surrounded by people who unconsciously sabotage the effort. Friends and family members who are comfortable with the current version may feel threatened by the prospect of change and subtly discourage the effort. Professional colleagues may resist changes that alter established dynamics or challenge their own comfort with status quo arrangements. These sabotage attempts are rarely conscious or malicious, but they can be powerfully effective in preventing genuine transformation. The person attempting change may find themselves constantly defending their choices, explaining their motivations, and dealing with others' emotions about their development. This external focus diverts energy from the internal work necessary for actual change and can ultimately defeat the entire effort. Maintaining privacy around the transformation process protects it from these external complications, while allowing the individual to focus entirely on the internal work required. Changes can develop and solidify without interference, creating a stronger foundation for the new patterns before they are tested by others' reactions and expectations. The results of this protected development process are often dramatic. Others notice significant changes but cannot identify exactly what has shifted or how the transformation occurred. The individual appears to have somehow become more centered, more confident, more capable, or more attractive. But the specific source of these improvements remains unclear. This mystery enhances the impact of the changes while protecting the individual from attempts to analyze, categorize, or replicate their development. The protection extends beyond the transformation period into ongoing life. Once you have successfully undergone fundamental psychological change, you understand viscerally that identity is chosen rather than fixed, and that personal power comes from internal development rather than external validation. This understanding creates a natural tendency toward privacy, about internal processes, that serves ongoing development and maintains the mystique that supports continued influence and effectiveness. The individual who has genuinely transformed themselves also understands the value of helping others without necessarily explaining exactly how the help is provided. They can offer guidance, support, and perspective that proves valuable to others while maintaining some privacy around their own methods and insights. This approach is often more helpful than detailed explanation because it encourages others to develop their own internal resources rather than becoming dependent on specific techniques or frameworks. The mentoring that emerges from this approach is particularly powerful because it develops genuine capability in others rather than mere imitation of external behaviors. The person receiving guidance learns to think and perceive differently rather than simply copying specific actions or strategies. This deeper level of development creates lasting change that serves the individual across various contexts rather than just specific situations. Providing this kind of guidance requires understanding that true help often involves creating conditions for others' growth rather than solving their problems directly. The transformed individual can see patterns and possibilities that others miss, but simply pointing these out may not be helpful if the other person lacks the context or capability to act on the information effectively. Instead, the more sophisticated approach involves asking questions, creating challenges, or arranging experiences that allow others to discover insights and develop capabilities naturally. This indirect approach takes longer than direct instruction but creates much more robust and lasting development. It also maintains the helper's mystique by demonstrating wisdom and effectiveness without revealing specific methodologies. The same principle applies to professional success. The individual who has genuinely transformed themselves often achieves results that others find impressive but difficult to explain or replicate. They seem to have insights that others miss, make connections that aren't obvious, and navigate complex situations with an ease that suggests hidden knowledge or capabilities. This apparent ease often results from the psychological flexibility and emotional stability that come from having successfully destroyed limiting aspects of the previous self. Situations that create stress, confusion, or paralysis in others are handled smoothly because the transformed individual operates from a more integrated and resourceful psychological state. The business professional who has done deep psychological work may find themselves naturally skilled at reading group dynamics, predicting market trends, or negotiating complex deals not because they have learned specific techniques, but because their enhanced psychological sophistication allows them to perceive patterns and possibilities that others miss. Their success appears somewhat mysterious to observers who focus on external factors rather than understanding the psychological foundation that supports exceptional performance. This mystery serves professional advancement by creating a reputation for effectiveness that transcends specific role requirements or technical skills. The individual becomes known as someone who gets things done or makes things work, without others being able to identify exactly what makes them different from their peers. This reputation opens doors to opportunities that might not be available to those whose capabilities are more easily understood and therefore more easily replaced. The same dynamic applies to personal relationships, where the transformed individual often finds themselves sought out as a friend, advisor, or partner, not because of specific qualities they advertise, but because of an overall presence and capability that others find attractive and reassuring. They become known as someone who has it together or knows how to handle things without necessarily being able to specify what it is or what things they handle particularly well. This attraction is based on others' unconscious recognition of psychological health and capability, rather than conscious analysis of specific traits or achievements. People are naturally drawn to those who seem internally stable and resourceful, because such individuals provide a sense of safety and possibility that is rare in a world full of reactive, emotionally volatile people. The transformed individual's emotional regulation and psychological stability create a kind of calm center that others find restful and energizing. Their presence doesn't demand anything from others because they are not seeking validation, attention, or emotional support. Instead, they offer a quality of attention and engagement that makes others feel heard and understood without judgment or agenda. This quality of presence is perhaps the most valuable result of the self-transformation process. It represents the integration of all the psychological work into a natural way of being that serves both personal effectiveness and positive impact on others. The individual who has successfully destroyed their weak self and developed genuine internal resources becomes a source of strength for others without depleting themselves in the process. The sustainability of this contribution to others comes from the fact that it emerges from abundance rather than obligation. The transformed individual offers support and guidance not because they feel they should, or because they need to be needed, but because their own internal fullness naturally overflows into service to others. This abundance-based giving is much more powerful and sustainable than need-based helping, because it doesn't create dependency or resentment in either direction. The mystery that surrounds this kind of individual often intensifies over time rather than diminishing, because their continued growth and development means they are always slightly different from how others remember them. They cannot be completely categorized or predicted because they are continuously evolving in ways that may not be visible to casual observation. This ongoing evolution is possible because the fundamental transformation process, once begun successfully, tends to become self-sustaining. The individual who has learned to identify and eliminate self-defeating patterns develops skill at recognizing new limitations as they emerge and addressing them before they become entrenched. They maintain a kind of psychological hygiene that prevents the accumulation of dysfunction that characterizes many people's lives. The maintenance of this psychological health requires ongoing attention to internal states and patterns, but it becomes increasingly natural and automatic as the skills develop. The individual learns to notice subtle signs of stress, reactivity, or limitation, and can address these issues promptly rather than allowing them to develop into larger problems. This self-maintenance capability is itself a source of mystery to others who struggle with psychological and emotional management. The transformed individual appears to maintain equilibrium under circumstances that would destabilize others, and they seem to recover quickly from setbacks that might derail less psychologically sophisticated people. The resilience that emerges from this psychological sophistication is qualitatively different from mere toughness or stubborn persistence. It's based on flexibility rather than rigidity, on the ability to adapt and flow rather than simply endure. This flexibility allows for much more effective responses to challenging circumstances and creates the appearance of almost supernatural capability to those who operate from more rigid psychological structures. The combination of this resilience with the natural mystique that comes from ongoing self-development creates a powerful presence that serves the individual across all areas of life. They become known as someone who can handle whatever comes up, who brings perspective and capability to challenging situations, and who somehow always seems to land on their feet regardless of circumstances. This reputation is not built through self-promotion or image management, but through consistent demonstration of genuine capability over time. Others learn to trust the transformed individual's judgment and rely on their stability not because they have been told to, but because experience has proven the individual's reliability and resourcefulness. The trust that develops around such individuals often extends beyond their demonstrated expertise into areas where they have no particular credentials or experience. Others assume that someone who handles their own life so well and demonstrates such consistent judgment probably has valuable insights about other areas as well. This generalized credibility becomes a form of social capital that opens doors and creates opportunities that would not be available to those who lack such comprehensive trust. The accumulation of this social capital over time creates expanding influence and opportunity that can appear almost magical to outside observers. The individual seems to attract good fortune, interesting opportunities, and valuable relationships without obvious effort or strategy. In reality, their genuine psychological development has created qualities that naturally attract positive outcomes, while their mystique prevents others from fully understanding or replicating the process. This apparent good fortune is actually the natural result of operating from a transformed psychological state that allows for better decisions, more authentic relationships, and more creative responses to opportunities and challenges. The individual who has destroyed their weak self operates from clarity rather than confusion, abundance rather than scarcity, and confidence rather than scarcity, and confidence rather than fear, naturally creating better outcomes than someone operating from the opposite psychological states. The mystery that protects and enhances these natural advantages ensures that they remain sustainable over time. If others could easily understand and replicate the individual's approach, the advantages might be temporary. Because the transformation is internal and not easily visible or copyable, the advantages tend to compound over time rather than diminishing through competition or imitation. This compounding effect is perhaps the ultimate validation of the approach advocated throughout this exploration. The individual who successfully destroys their weak self through private transformation while maintaining strategic mystery about the process creates sustainable advantages that serve them throughout their life while contributing positively to others' lives as well. The man who destroys his weak self truly cannot be destroyed by others because he has eliminated the internal vulnerabilities that external forces require for their destructive power. Having faced and overcome his own psychological limitations, he no longer provides the emotional reactivity, desperate need, or predictable responses that others might exploit. He becomes, in essence, unassailable, not through aggression or defensive posturing, but through the completion of his own internal work. This completion is not a final state, but an ongoing process of maintenance and continued growth. The transformed individual understands that psychological health requires constant attention and that new challenges will always emerge that test and develop capabilities further. But having once successfully transformed fundamental aspects of themselves, they possess both the skills and confidence necessary to continue the process indefinitely. The mystery that surrounds such individuals is ultimately the mystery of human potential fully realized. Others sense something powerful and attractive but cannot quite identify what makes the person different because the difference is internal and comprehensive rather than being based on any specific external factors. This mystery serves as protection for continued growth while inspiring others to seek their own transformation, creating a positive influence that extends far beyond the individual's immediate circle. In a world filled with reactive, predictable people operating from unexamined psychological patterns, the individual who has genuinely transformed themselves becomes a powerful force for positive change simply through their example and presence. They demonstrate that fundamental transformation is possible while maintaining enough mystery about the process to encourage others to find their own path, rather than simply imitating external behaviors. This balance between inspiration and independence is perhaps the greatest gift such individuals offer to the world. They prove that change is possible while respecting others' autonomy to discover their own methods and timeline for transformation. In doing so, they embody the ultimate expression of strength through mystery, powerful enough to transform themselves and help others, wise enough to know that true strength cannot be given but must be developed independently by each individual who seeks it. The journey from weak self to transformed self is ultimately a journey from external dependence to internal sovereignty, from reactive patterns to conscious choice, from predictable limitation to creative possibility. Those who complete this journey successfully understand that the mystery they cultivate is not a hiding place but a sacred space where ongoing transformation continues to unfold, protected from interference and enhanced by the natural human attraction to what cannot be fully understood or controlled. In this protection and attraction lies the ultimate paradox of personal power. We become most influential when we need least from others, most attractive when we require least validation, and most powerful when we have surrendered the ego's desperate attempts to control external circumstances in favor of mastering our own internal responses. The mystery that surrounds this mastery is not calculated strategy but natural consequence, the inevitable result of becoming someone who operates from principles and capabilities that transcend ordinary psychological limitations. This transcendence is available to anyone willing to undertake the necessary internal work, but it requires the courage to destroy familiar aspects of oneself in service of becoming someone better. It demands the wisdom to protect the transformation process from external interference, and the patience to allow mystery to develop naturally, rather than trying to manufacture it strategically. For those who possess these qualities and undertake this journey, the rewards extend far beyond personal benefit into a form of service to human potential itself, demonstrating through their very existence what becomes possible when someone commits fully to their own transformation while maintaining the humility to keep the process appropriately private. The man who destroys his weak self ultimately discovers that he has not lost anything essential but has instead revealed what was always there beneath the accumulated limitations and conditioned responses. The strength that emerges is not new but uncovered, the wisdom not acquired but recognized, the mystery not created but acknowledged as the natural state of a human being operating at full capacity. In this recognition lies both the completion of the journey and the beginning of new possibilities that emerge only when someone has done the fundamental work of becoming truly themselves.